guys. They're all small guys. Lots to learn from them. Okay. We'll start with general questions, right? There are a lot of questions here. They've asked me to wrap in 30 minutes. The Indian startup ecosystem has evolved rapidly. How has the role of VCs changed in the last decade? I'll start with Apoorv.
I think role of capital has been diminishing over time. Earlier, there was a big gap between demand and supply of capital. When supply of capital was not deep enough, I think access to capital became the differentiator. As capital becomes more available, I think capital alone cannot build businesses, and I think that it just doesn't cut it. Over time, especially at Atomic Capital, we truly believe that throwing money at the problem doesn't solve the problem. And VCs are now realizing that they also have to create differentiation. Earlier, they wanted too many funds, so now the competition is increasing at every stage. So VCs also have to differentiate for various reasons, both supply side and demand side reasons. I think VCs are now realizing that they have to play an active role beyond capital. And to be honest, I think different funds have a very different thesis. In our case, just to talk about Atomic Capital, we have a very hands-on approach where typically VCs have a portfolio of 30 to 50 companies. We'll have a portfolio of only 10 companies. So it's a very large, concentrated position in fewer companies, and then help founders build companies very, very closely.
So thank you so much, Apoorv. I think you brought out a very strong point on just money is not going to solve problem, right? So I'll come to Anju. Where do you think VCs solve the gap, right? See, most of the founders are all early stage founders. They are not very equipped with how to run a company. Heads on. Even if it's a huge fundraising problem, or if the restrooms are not working properly, founders are asked. That's the role of founder, right? Where do you think VCs come as a bridge to solve the problem?
So I think the role of a VC obviously changes depending on where you're coming in. The support that a seed stage founder needs is very different from a Series A founder. So let me start with the seed stage like you mentioned. So I think like he said, VCs are now becoming more of partners. It is in our vested interest that we work with the founder to help them be successful, right? Both of us, it's a win-win situation. Both of us has a vested interest in making the company succeed. So a couple of different ways. One of the things we do is with any of our portfolio companies, we have what we call a mentor trust. So we have a pool of mentors that we have curated, and we allocate a primary mentor to work with the startup to address issues like this, whether it be strategy, whether it be hiring, whether it be operational, whether it be pivoting, because that's really important at the early stage. Second is networking. Right? I mean, in terms of connecting, for example, if you're a B2B company, can the fund connect you to corporates to do POCs for strategic partnership, which is another thing that we do. And third is leveraging the network of portfolio companies of the VC fund itself. So what we've realized, there's a lot of value the founders can provide, like the Series A founders providing kind of the early stage founders. So those are 3 quick things I would mention.
Oh, that's really helpful. So I'll come to you, Uyar. So you focus on very early stage startups, right? So at that time, startups will not have a lot of data points in terms of revenue or validation. So how is that different when you compare it to late stage investments? Or what all do you look for when you're investing?
I think every venture firm looks at 3 things broadly, which is founder, market, and that they're investing in. Depending on what stage you're coming in at, later stage funds look more at company data, while early stage funds look less at company data, primarily because it doesn't exist. At the stage at which I operate, we look at more on founder and market, less on company, but how are they thinking of the future? That's what we look at. And there are data points that are there related to the market and the founder at least. And I think that at each stage you're underwriting some kind of risk. So at pre-seed, where we are operating, you're underwriting basically all the risks. That can this founder build a company? Is this market actually going to be that large, and will the company be profitable?
Got it. I'll come to you, Anju. So many many founders think raising VC is the biggest milestone in their life, and once they have raised the big money, they are set for life. The startup is going to become the next unicorn, right? What are the typical challenges founders face once they raise? Or where do you think they go wrong, or what are the things which they generally do which is wrong when they raise the funding?
So I think one of the biggest problems I think that a founder faces is when to raise funds. I think, like you said, people say if I raise funds, actually, if you don't raise funds, that's better. Remember, every time you're raising funds, you're giving away a part of your company. So don't raise funds unless you absolutely have to. So that's one. So let's say you're at the right stage, you want to raise funds. I think the second problem is sometimes, I'll be brutally honest, founders feel they are know-all. Yes, you have to be passionate about what you're doing, you have to believe in what you're doing, but you have to be open to feedback. I think this second problem that I see a lot of founders is they're very rigid. They will not take input because it is their baby, it is their company. But you have to be open to taking feedback and learning and adjusting. I think that's the other thing kind of founders face. And I think third is making the right choice of who you're taking money from, whether it be an angel, whether it be a fund. I think you have to be, if you have a good solution, if you have a good team, you'll find the money. Oftentimes you don't want to be with a fund that one is not investing in an area that is their expertise, right? Because then what is the value? So to your first question, go to a fund that you believe is going to add value to your company and help you grow. Look at their portfolio companies, talk to their portfolio company founders, look at what they're investing in. So that's what I would say.
I think that's a very good point on analyzing the VC first on who you're taking the money from. I'll come to Apoorv, continuing with the same question. How do you think building the right network helps in the entire scheme of things?
I think network has its own value. To be honest, network is not something my strength, given that I have not had long years in investing. But I think the few things which come to mind if you talk about value of network, I think first and foremost, fundraising is a very time-consuming process. And as a VC, unfortunately, you have to convince people to give you money, and then you have to convince people to take your money. So it's actually not an easy job to be honest. But I think fundraising is a very, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of bandwidth from building. So ideally, you want founders to spend as little time as possible for raising capital. And as Anju rightly mentioned, I think if you know the kind of check you're raising, because every VC has a sweet spot when they like to come in. There are a few funds who go multi-stage, but typically a lot of VCs have a sweet spot they like to come in. For example, in our case, we like to come in when there's a sign of product market fit. That thing is very, very subjective, but in our case, we would say if a company is doing million ARR, roughly 8 crore annualized revenue, typically is the right time for us to get engaged. So similarly, I think if founders know who are the right VCs for their scale, for their sector. So for example, a lot of times VCs have a sector specific focus. In our case, it's consumer and consumer tech. If you're building in deep tech, it would be a great company, but we don't have mandate from our investors to have a deep tech. So I think to answer your question, network, I think it sometimes makes fundraise process super efficient if you know who to reach out to. Second thing, what happens is a lot of VCs do reference checks. Sometimes you want to make sure it's a long-term relationship. I call it a professional marriage, to be honest. And I think divorce are expensive. So idea is to I think do the right reference checks, and that's why I think network really helps, because there are people who are known as knowledgeable people, and if you're right network, and I think through those reference check, I think becomes very easy to cut a long story short. I think it can help you, right network can help you make the entire fundraise process very efficient, and I think streamline the entire journey.
Yeah, I think I would concur, because I'll come to you, Aviral. So you invest in a very early stage startups, right? Can you give us few examples of the startups you've invested, and how, as a VC, have you helped them transform that process?
So we are very early in our AI, couple in consumer brands and consumer tech. At the stage at which we are, we have to be very involved and hands-on with the companies. Most of them are first-time founders. I think a lot of them have never made a P&L in their life as well. They just have an idea and and they want to build it. I think a lot of people who come out of IIT Madras as well, they have a prototype but they've not really built a business. So at the stage at which we are operating, it's a lot of hand holding that's required. I think it's a little too early to say how we've actually helped them, but if I take some examples, sharpening, we have sharpened the focus of one of our companies are trying to do too many things. Go-to-market strategy for one, helped with a senior technical hire with the third. And what we are trying to do is using the community and the platform that has got built at AJVC to give access to a large number of people very early, which is usually very difficult when you're a young startup, you don't have a brand, nobody knows you, and it's very hard both for customers as well as people who want to join your team to trust you. So we are like that bridge that helps you get some trust, and that's what we are doing.
I think that's very informative. I'll come to you, Anju. So there's a general misconception that VCs will always push the startup to scale very fast. If they come on board, you have to scale. Your scaling is your only concern. Profitability is secondary. You need to get your ARR targets, MRR targets. But founders also have to focus on sustainable business, right? Today we see most of the startups who scaled very quickly are failing. So how should a founder balance it, and what is the balance? Or how does he have to manage the entire process? One side VCs and other side sustainability.
So to answer your VC question, I mean that's a very important question. Like I said, for a founder to answer, which VC you're going with. I mean, look at their track history, right? So you want to go with somebody who's kind of growing with you. There will be people who want to invest because, I mean, after all, a VC fund has their own stakeholders, right? They're in the business of making money. So a lot of funds will push you to kind of, their exit and so that they can get their money back. So, make a wise choice. I think for us, it's all about making sure that the founder is building value for his or her customers. If you're building value, your valuation will come. So think of those two words very differently. Valuation is very different from creating value. If you are creating value, your valuation would go up. If you focus on valuation, it's not necessary you're creating value or you're going to survive, to your point. So yes, the founder has a lot of things to kind of deal on. That's where it's very important that when we look at startups, we're looking at the team. Right? It's very difficult for an individual founder. That's why we don't like investing in if there's only one founder. There has to be a co-founder. So the one thing that we always tell founders is make sure you have good advisors because they are the right people to help you, which is why when we invest in a portfolio company, we allocate them mentors. So I think, and don't be shy about asking for help. A lot of founders make that question, "Ki mera company, I have to do it." If I ask for help, people will think I don't know what I'm doing. Ask for help. You can't know everything, you can't do everything. That's why you have advisors, that's why you have co-founders, that's why you're working with a fund.
I think perfectly summarized. Apoorv, quick question, right? 5 years back, when I started to know about VCs and startups, there were so many rumors, so many misconceptions, right? When you get money from a VC, their finance team will come and sit in your office. You will be micromanaged to the core. You will not get any freedom. What are the general misconceptions people still think about VCs and how do you deal?
Some of it would be true, to be honest. Maybe some VCs can't do it, who knows. But I think the first of all you have to understand, I think for me, there's a famous saying that show me incentives, and I think that explains behavior, right? So when you as a VC or anyone who invests in a company comes on a cap table, I think incentives are completely aligned. Typically, it varies from round to round, but let's say if you own X%, typically founders own 4 to 5x or 6x, especially in the stage at which at least we come in. So the point I'm trying to make is, VC should never do something which will erode value, at least conceptually, because incentives are completely aligned. If they're doing something which is hurting the company, essentially they are hurting themselves. So first of all, by nature, VC business is not supposed to do something which hurts the business. And everyone is aligned to make sure the company creates value, and I think the valuation grows. Having said that, I think different people have different style, and I think what I've seen is a lot of time people try to simplify things, I think oversimplify things. They try to, I think every VC is same, while you find that every fund is different. And to be honest, I could start Atomic Capital only because my thesis is different from other funds. If I was trying to start another VC, no one will give me capital. How are we different? The way we are different is we are saying that capital alone cannot build businesses, and in our case, we will help you build business beyond capital. So the point I'm trying to make is, I think this misnomer that okay, every VC behaves in a one-dimensional way, I think that is a wrong misnomer. Within that, I think there's a spectrum of VCs. There are VCs who are very hands-off. There are VCs who wrote, if I'm not wrong, 100 term sheets in 2021, and they don't take board seat, they just invest and move on, which is one way. And there are VCs who will make you sit in their office, do all sort of things you mentioned. So there's a spectrum of VCs. What we believe that there has to be a little bit of, I think, involvement, which really helps, because some of the founders are first-time founders. They've never built these organizations before, and someone who's done it either through mentor network or through yourself. I think some sort of involvement, in our view, helps. But the point I'm trying to make is there is no one type of VCs. There are all sort of VCs. It's for you to decide what kind of partners you want to have. As I said, it's a long-term vision.
So I'll come to you, Aviral. Typically, two founders are there. Maybe just after college, or they're quitting their job and they have an idea. They have tested it by a small MVP or something. What are the typical steps do they have to take before they approach a VC for funding?
I think the first thing that they need to understand is if they can be entrepreneurs. A lot of people don't really even reflect that is this journey one for me. In fact, I wrote an essay a couple of weeks back about this, that should I even be an entrepreneur? I think the second is, you said that there are two, so I'm assuming that they've figured out that they need a co-founder. That's the second step, you need a co-founder. So a very interesting stat is that 99% of Indian companies are bootstrapped. Only 1% have raised venture money ever. So raising VC is an exception, it's not the rule, because the media actually talks about high growth companies and companies that raise. And I think fundamentally that boils down to two things. One is, can you start the company without revenue or users? If you need to demonstrate that I have users but I cannot generate revenue or profit, you will need to raise venture money. That is question one, and the answer to that is no, then maybe you don't. And the second is, do I need to grow really fast? And if the answer to both these questions is no, you actually don't need to raise venture money. That's how most Indian businesses have been built. I think you should ask all these questions before you actually start and decide whether you want to raise VC money. So this is what actually you should do before you even start to approach a venture firm.
Got it. Very good. Anju, will come to you for a last question. So I have two questions for you. See, one is, there are a lot of couple founders who are starting startups, right? And how do you see that as a project? See, there are cases where it has worked out fantastically well, and there are cases it has gone down also. So how do you see that? So should they typically start a startup? See, we don't have any say whether they should or not, but how do you see that as startup founders? And how do you see women diversity or diversity coming in founder group? And what is the trend going on that side?
Interesting question. But see, I wouldn't look at a couple founder any different from two co-founders. So when we're looking at a company, like you said, one of the core things is, the founders. And if there are multiple founders, what is the relationship between the founders? How well do they know each other? Have they known each other for a while? Because how they two work together is really important. So if the couple, they've known each other for a while, they know how each other works, they're probably complementary. So when we are looking at founders, we're saying, okay, are the founders complementary? Do they work well together? Do they trust each other? Does the team trust them? So I think if those parameters are met, it doesn't matter if it's a couple or not a couple. I think they need to match those criteria. And like you said, some work, some don't work. But oftentimes when it's work, it's where these parameters meet. And oftentimes it works because they both have a driven passion, they're both complementary, and they balance each other. Because going to the other thing, when you talk about women founders, the biggest thing is the work-home balance. Doesn't matter what you're saying. And where I have seen women founders succeed is where they have the support of the family and the community. Without that, that is more so important. And a lot of that is growing, which is why more and more women are coming into entrepreneurship. More and more women are getting into this field. Being from an IIT, the number of women students graduating from an IIT is growing. The number of women founders is growing. The number of women in investment firms, in VC funds is growing. The number of women angel investors is growing. So I think there's a very healthy growth on all, because you need all of these. As with anybody, you need an ecosystem. The number of women mentors is growing. So I think that ecosystem is actually really, really strong now in India, and it's a great time for women entrepreneurs.
Definitely. So Apoorv, one last question, I'll finish it.
I thought it was the last question.
Last one, Anju.
And he asked to. That's what he lied.
So Apoorv, this was some more personal questions to few students. Many of them want to break into VC, right? What are the steps do they have to take? And for a typical IIT or a CA per se, how do they get into a VC, and what should they have in their profile?
I think obviously my views are biased by the way I look at investing, but my view is first build some. I think role of a VC is to sometime be sort of the board of these companies, advise founders, tell founders what to do. So my advice would be build. I think this is a great time to build in a world of AI where you don't need too many people to actually build. In a very capital efficient manner, you can build businesses. So my strong advice would be try and build something yourself. Even if you fail, you will learn. And I think you'll be much better VC by building something if you directly jump to VC. I'll come to that point as well. But that will be my first advice. Because when I go and talk to founder friends, and sometimes I think we have very heated discussions as well, because as part of board member, you have to have disagreements as well. I think if you're superficial in your advice and guidance, it comes through. If you yourself have never built anything, and you've been someone who just lived on Excel sheets, which is fine to be honest, but I think you can be much better VC if you build something, so my advice would be build. But having said that, some people might say, I just want to jump into VC and private equity fund. I think the best thing which really works is understand how businesses get built. Because you will be joining at an early stage and entry level position where I think the primary role would be to talk to new founders, source companies and evaluate companies and help fund evaluate those companies. So try and form a perspective. Perspective can be formed by reading a lot of news. Perspective can be formed by looking at a lot of great content. Perspective can be by networking, as you rightly mentioned. So my first advice would be build rather than jumping into VC bandwagon. And if you at all want to join our VC bandwagon, have a perspective of your own. What sector, what companies, what founders you like. I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think let's give a big round for the panel. I think the entire discussion was very, very informative.